What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel.
Let me tell you something, dude. Injustice just keeps getting better and better and better. Now, this is the section of Injustice where we talk about Brian Buccellato taking over the series because Tom Taylor left with year 3. He was like, time to move on to something else. I think he took off to do Green Lantern, Edge of Oblivion, which I don't think was actually as well received as his Injustice run, but it was still pretty enjoyable. It was still pretty good. Actually, Edge of Oblivion covers what happened to the Green Lantern Corps going into Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern's rebirth, for those of you guys who are curious about that whole story arc. I'm pretty sure pretty sure a comic historian has videos on that, but the fact remains here that Brian Buccellato does a really good job, because one of the reasons why Tom Taylor's run was so cool was because the pacing was as damn close to perfect as you could get. The pacing was amazing, and this is almost the exact same thing, but we take an entirely different approach, and that's the theme that I'm hoping you guys notice here. When it came to Tom Taylor, volumes 1 and 2 of Injustice were just like this massive expansive story that all just led up to this major fight between all the superheroes on Earth. Volume 3 gave us magic. Volume 4 gives us gods, and it's really cool because we deal with the gods of Olympus. Now keep in mind, when it comes to DC Comics, when it comes to the idea of gods and so on and so forth, they take a very real world approach. Judeo-Christianity, we've talked about that. Lucifer Morningstar, the Presence, who represents the god of Abraham, Michael, the angels, so on and so forth. Those are all aspects of Vertigo. When it comes to gods, as we think of them in the real world, that is to say like Greek gods, that's all Wonder Woman mythos, and it's really cool to see how this gets folded in. What we do is we basically pick up with Ares and we pick up with Hercules. And this is actually a really cool concept because Ares, keep in mind, is a god of war. He literally just lives and feeds off combat. That's all it is. Who's fighting is almost totally irrelevant to Ares most of the time, so long as people are fighting. It's like the Model T. You can have the Model T in any color you want as long as it's black. Ares, anybody can fight as long as they're fighting. It creates a really, really cool situation here. But also keep in mind that Ares likes to play both sides of the field. And that's what he does here. Of course, he appears to Hercules and says, hey, look, I don't know if you know it, because up here in Olympus, you guys don't care about the goings on of man. But up here in Olympus, you guys are archaic. You guys are memories of a time long since past. No one in the world right now sits down and says, remember the legend of Hercules? No one ever thinks about that. They think about Superman, they think about Wonder Woman, they think about Shazam, Batman, they think about these guys as gods among men, whether they have powers or not. What Ares basically says here is, look, you guys may be legitimate gods, but people down on Earth are worshiping false idols. They're worshiping individuals who basically fancy themselves as gods. They've basically taken your place. They're guilty of the worst case of hubris. Now again, this is just kind of Ares stirring the pot a little bit, getting the gods into the mix, because remember, he's been there in the background the entire time. He was, one of the characters that appeared in volume 1 of Injustice when he faced off against Wonder Woman. He's always just kind of been in the background, always been there, sort of watching, observing, just seeing how things unfold. But what we do from here is we switch over to Superman. This is the cool thing about what Brian Buccellato does, because what he's doing is basically thinning out the herd. He's looking at everything that Tom Taylor did up to this point, all the loose ends, all the plot lines that Tom Taylor left hanging when he basically took off and said, how do we wrap these up? Remember, after the whole battle between, Mr. Mxyzptlk and between Trigon, this reality distorting conflict that almost laid waste to existence itself, the Batman had basically taken off. At that point, it was like the war was over. I mean, it had just reached this massive climax where it was like, where do you go from here? There's nothing left to fight about. There's really no reason to go. But for Superman, remember, this is an obsession. This is what Brian Buccellato is saying. For him, it's not enough for Batman to slink off into the shadows and for Bruce Wayne to call it a day. Superman wants to hear him quit. Superman wants to hear Batman say, you won, the war is over. Now, here's the crazy thing about this, is this is what seems to be the downfall of Superman, right? Like, he just can't accept winning under certain circumstances. He has to accept winning under his circumstances. And that really is the failing of all great leaders. The fact that they cannot accept the fact that they won or they lost under any number of circumstances. They have to win under their circumstance. They have to win under, the way they want to win. They can't just accept winning. They can't win by a technicality. They have to win fair and square, so to speak. And that's what Superman's going for. Superman's like, I want to hear Batman say it's done. I want to hear Batman say it's over. And so the entire Justice League is scouring the earth looking for Batman. Everyone is out there looking for Batman, and no one can find him. The other half of this is that Superman is turning allies into enemies. And the reason why is because where the Justice League has been by Superman's side almost every step of the way, Hal Jordan's been by his side every step of the way, Barry Allen, Shazam, all these guys, Wonder Woman, have been by his side every step of the way. For Superman, it's not good enough. His obsession is driving a wedge between himself and the other superheroes. And this comes by way of Hal Jordan, right? I mean, when he's talking to Hal Jordan, he says, we need to do better. We need to keep going. We have to push harder. Hal Jordan's like, look, man, we're doing everything we can. The problem with this is that Superman just can't let this go. Now, again, this rift begins to come into play when Superman stops talking to Hal Jordan like an equal and starts talking to him as a subject. And this is when we start moving into the direction of the Injustice video game. This is when we start moving into that depiction of Superman as seeing himself as haughty, as possessing extreme hubris, where he sees himself better than everybody else, including the Justice League. This is when we start getting into those moments from the video game when the different members who are part of the Justice League, who seem like they're on Superman's side, start looking at him with a cocked eye, saying, I don't know if that guy is really on our side. They start following Superman more out of fear than out of respect. Now, of course, Wonder Woman makes this point. She basically comes along and says, hey, look, everybody's been on your side here. You do not want to let this obsession with Batman become the thing that drives a wedge between you and the Justice League, because this is what's so ironic about this. It's like the victory that Batman never planned for. It's like a man, that along his way to a battlefield decides to cut a horse loose, doesn't think anything about it. And then once we get to this battle, this horse runs in the way of a general. The general's startled for a second and then is hit in the heart with an arrow. Just because of the fact that man cut that horse loose somewhere along the line and didn't even think about it, that action came back to basically cause victory here. And it's not necessarily that Batman's won per se. It's just an instance of how Batman's actions, how his legacies always live on in different consequences and have unforeseen, results. And so it creates a really interesting situation. But at this point, we switch back over to Bruce Wayne himself. And this is when we basically have him just kind of staring at computer monitors. I mean, it's really just him mulling over the fact that he has, for all intents and purposes, lost this battle, that he's lost this war, that basically it's all said and done. Because keep in mind, after the events of Trigon, after the battle between Trigon and Mr. Mxyzptlk, after discovering that all the events of year 3 were written for the sole purpose, or were done for the sole purpose of Constantine using the entire superhero community to get rid of anybody who would put his daughter's life in danger, Batman basically lost everything. I mean, he lost almost all of his forces. He lost almost all of his friends. He's lost almost all of his insurgents group. He basically has nothing left. The number of allies he has on his side, you can count on one hand. And so it creates a wild situation, because it's like, how do you keep fighting? The question is answered when he meets with Ares. And Ares says, have you thought about my proposition? And Batman says, I have. I'm in. Now, what this proposition is, we don't find out here for a few minutes or so. What we end up doing is we pick up with Renee Montoya. Now, keep in mind, Renee Montoya and Huntress were together, and the idea is that because Huntress died, Renee Montoya is just kind of left to pick up the pieces here. She's just sort of left to deal with the situation. And what she does is she begins going back through and kind of reliving this older experience from 10 years beforehand. But once she jumps back to the modern day, we find out this is all just her in a drunken stupor. That in the aftermath of her friend's, her friend basically dying, of the woman that she was with dying, she's basically just kind of let herself go, and this is interesting because this is Buccellato saying, hey, look, guys, the aftermath of this massive conflict has affected people in a multitude of different ways. Not everybody is just kind of sitting around trying to figure out what to do next. Some people don't know what to do next. Renee Montoya has no idea what to do next. The result here is that she's just kind of drunk. She's just kind of hanging out, and that's it. There's really nothing else there. Selena Kyle, Catwoman, is bailing out on their alliance. Everybody's just kind of like, we've lost. It's done. Bruce Wayne isn't doing anything. He's just resting on his laurels, just, oh my God, we lost, and that's it. Now, at this point, we jump to Harley Quinn. This is actually really kind of cool because Buccellato's kind of messing with this whole notion of Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy being together. It wasn't really confirmed in Injustice as far as I'm aware, but we know in the main the main DC universe right now, that when it came to Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, that the two of them are very much together. Of course, they broke up recently, but their romance was something that was kind of hinted at, it was confirmed, and then it came to an end. But the idea of Harley Quinn is that she's just bored as hell, right? I mean, there's no Joker here. There's no crime sprees to go on. There's no one to just run out there and kill. What she needs is somebody to bring some adventure into her life. And of course, she ends up going to Shazam. Now, this is a funny situation here because Billy Batson is literally sitting in a classroom and there is a super hot crazy chick pressing herself against the window like, hey, Billy, come and get me. Now, let me tell you something, man. If I was in high school, I would be like, Teach, I gotta go. Like, I need to leave with or without your permission because there's a super hot chick that wants my attention and it's time for me to go. Now, from here, we switch over to Cyborg and Damian Wayne. And this is cool. This is when Buccellato begins to sort of wrap things up. And the reason why is because of the fact that Renee Montoya has basically hopped herself up on a ton of super pills, attacks Damian Wayne and Cyborg and says, look, Superman, of course, attracting the attention of a news helicopter, says, Superman, get down here, fight me, or Damian Wayne dies. Now, again, this is just Renee Montoya just hopped up on drugs. I mean, that's it. She's just hopped up on alcohol and super pills. She's basically in the worst situation that a person could be in. Now, again, switching back over to Harley Quinn and Billy Batson, this is one of the things that I really, really like here. And the reason why is because this gives us Harley Quinn trying to find something to do. Of course, she basically says, hey, Billy Batson, let's go hang out. Let's just go commit crimes, change into Shazam. We'll go find something to keep ourselves entertained. I have no idea. And it's kind of a funny situation because Harley Quinn, again, is still goofy. She's still kind of out there. She's kind of silly, but she's such a great character because despite the fact that she was a bad guy, it's almost like she's kind of reforming. She's this wild card. In Injustice, is she a good guy or is she a bad guy? Is her alliance to Batman because Superman killed the Joker? Or is her alliance to Batman because she's just used to the idea of Bruce Wayne and doesn't really want to face off against Superman? Will she betray Bruce Wayne somewhere along the line? She's very much this wild card here, and it creates a really, really cool scenario because it's like, what would happen with her character? Now, of course, the actions of Renee Montoya draw the attention of Superman. And of course, hopping up on all these different super pills, she gasses herself up. The problem with all this, and the funny thing about all this, is that her body is not inherently designed to withstand all this energy, to withstand all this power. She's very much human. And that was the reason why Batman always gave each of them a single super pill. Because if they did what Renee Montoya is doing right now, they would succumb to the same effects where Superman goes to her and says, hey, look, your body cannot handle this much power. Your body cannot handle this raw amount of energy. Your heart's failing. And what happens is she literally just succumbs to a heart attack. Like her heart just shuts down, and that's the end of her. Now, of course, this coincides with the arrival of Bruce Wayne after realizing what it is that Renee Montoya had raced off to do. Of course, watching the news is really all it would take for him to know what it is that she's done. But with his arrival here comes the answer that Superman wants, where Superman says, where Wonder Woman says, hey, look, that's Batman. You've been searching for him. You can end this now. Kill him. Superman's moral code comes into play where he says, this is not Batman. This is Bruce Wayne. This is a grieving man. And he tells Bruce Wayne, take her and go. Get out of here. But before you leave, I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you tell me this war is over. And Bruce Wayne does exactly that. He says, fine, it's over. It's done. We're not fighting anymore. Now, at this point, I want to switch over. I want to kind of sidetrack for a second, and I want to switch over to the gods. And the reason why is because this is a little momentary section, but this sets the stage for everything else that's going on. What we do is we pick up with Olympus, and we pick up with Zeus, and we pick up with Hera. Remember, Zeus is ruler of all the gods, Hera as his wife. And so for the most part, what Zeus says goes. No one really challenges him in Olympus just because of the power that he possesses. Again, within the realm of DC Comics and even in Greek mythology, there was a hierarchy. You had Zeus at the top with a massive amount of power. It was really more respect than anything else. And then you had a lot of the other gods and goddesses that stood below him that ranged everywhere from the proper gods or the prime gods that lived on Olympus down to, earthly gods that represented different facets, water and rain, so on and so forth. But what happens is Hera goes to Zeus and says, hey, look, these guys, Superman, all those people fancy themselves gods. They see themselves as your replacement. They see themselves as better than you. They see themselves as better than us. It's time that we put them in their place. It's time that we remind them who the true gods are. Now, this is Hera being manipulative. And that's how she was in a lot of different ways. Hera was always vengeful. She was full of wrath. She was kind of this, this Greek god embodiment of hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. When Hera got pissed, the world felt her wrath. It was insane how cool it was. But at this point, again, we just kind of pick up with the aftermath of Bruce Wayne and Superman when Superman says, hey, look, I want you to tell me this is all over with. And we basically find out, of course, it's not. I mean, Batman's not just going to give up, right? I mean, that's never what Bruce Wayne does. Bruce Wayne never just says, okay, fine, you win, and then he walks away and calls it a day. It never happens in that capacity. And so what we do is we pick up with Oracle and we pick up with Lex Luthor. And what we find out is that Lex Luthor appears to be working on a clone of Superman. Now, that's one of the cooler things here because, again, we get these little bits of call to action. Batman goes to Arthur Curry, goes to Aquaman, the first time we've seen him since Volume 1, and he says, hey, look, I need your help here. Arthur's response is no. The last time that I challenged Superman, they grabbed Olympus and threw it into the desert. We're not playing that game again. He says, you're on the surface. My domain is the oceans. This is your problem. You deal with it. Now, the beauty about this, of what Brian Buccella's doing, is he's basically kind of drawing these allegories to isolationism, right? I mean, if a country stays isolated in time of conflict long enough, eventually the winning side will conquer that country. Like if they wait long enough. That's why the US got involved during World War II. I mean, we had a multitude of different actions. We put sanctions on Japan, hence the reason why they attacked Pearl Harbor. We were sending weapons and arms and all different kinds of stuff. But eventually it just became prudent for the United States to get involved, both because of the fact that, President wanted to, but because of the fact that it was also necessary because the encroachment of the fascist powers, the Axis forces all across Europe fighting this winning war, that they were basically taking, required American intervention in order to essentially save things. Again, there were a lot of politics, but there was also some measure of, if we don't do something, things will get bad very, very fast. That's why the Battle of Midway was so important, because it was literally the sole action in the Pacific that kept the Japanese from advancing to the west. So the cool thing about this is we basically pick up with Lex Luthor talking with Barbara Gordon. And the idea is, he says, look, I've modified these super pills. I've adjusted these super pills attuned to you specifically. So long as you take them, you will be able to regain your ability to walk. And that's the coolest thing about this, because, jumping back over to Harley Quinn and to Billy Batson, where Harley Quinn just kind of keeps messing with him, having her own fun, that kind of thing. Eventually she's summoned by Barbara Gordon. That's really what happens. All these different people start getting summoned by Barbara Gordon. Catwoman summoned, Batwoman summoned, Harley Quinn, so on and so forth. Once they all come together, it's this idea that Batgirl joins their cause, that Barbara Gordon rejoins their cause. And the result is that they basically go forward. And that's kind of the cool thing here, is because if you notice, this is primarily Bat family. I mean, this is Bat family material here. Harley Quinn, one of Batman's most notable enemies. Catwoman, one of Batman's most notable enemies and lovers. Batgirl, Batwoman, these are Bat family members. And it's kind of cool because it's Buccellato basically drawing this idea that things are staying in the family. They're being played very close to the vest. And so what we do is we pick up with the Hall of Justice and the idea that the forces of Themyscira, the armies of Hippolyta, have arrived at the Hall of Justice to force Superman to stand down. Now, what we do here is we pick up with Hera proper. And this is when we learn a lot of what's going on behind the scenes, that when Wonder Woman had been taken out, when she had been cast into the eternal sleep, remember, that had happened, in the last couple volumes, that Hippolyta had gone to Hera and begged her help in bringing Wonder Woman out of her reverie, out of her coma. The issue with this was that Hippolyta had to basically sign a pact. She had to basically make a promise to Hera. Now, we didn't know what that was. We didn't know what that pact was, but what we find out is it was more or less kind of this open-ended favor that Hera basically went to Hippolyta and said, I will call on you at some point along the line, and when that happens, you will answer my call. If you don't, you will be brought to bear for your failure to adhere to my request. And so this is exactly what happens. Hera says, I'm calling on you. I'm calling on your armies. You are going to march on the Justice League, Wonder Woman and all. You're going to march on every last one of them, and you're going to bring them in, or you're going to kill them. And in response to this, Hippolyta says, no, like, that's my daughter. That's the daughter of Zeus. Now, the issue with this is that it reminds Hera of her husband's infidelity, right? I mean, that was a huge aspect of Greek mythology. Hera would take her revenge on people who were basically the children of Zeus. The only exception to that is like Hercules, right? I mean, she couldn't really go against Hercules. He was the honorable son of Zeus, and he basically stood as one of the greatest heroes to have ever existed. So he was kind of off limits for Hera to a degree. But with regards to the particular events here, Hera can very much go against the entirety of the Justice League. And so again, we have Wonder Woman, we have Superman, all these different forces saying, hey, look, you guys got to go. If you guys don't go, it's going to result in a war. It's going to result in a conflict, and that's going to be the end of that. In the midst of all this, Batman and his forces arrive. And this is when we start to learn what it is that went on behind the scenes. That when Batman met with Ares, it was for the purpose of basically turning the gods against Superman. It was grabbing allies that they wouldn't normally ally themselves with. It was basically Bruce Wayne going to Ares, or Ares coming to Bruce Wayne and saying, hey, look, we can take out the Justice League. We can bring them down, but you need the gods of Olympus in order to pull that off, because the power they possess can rival that of Superman himself, or at least seem to rival that of Superman himself. And so in response to this, with this huge gathering of various forces, what happens is Wonder Woman says, look, if we do not leave, they'll kill us. And so what she does is she basically invokes judgment by combat. And she says, I am going to invoke this policy. I will be a champion. Now, the cool thing about this is that Harley Quinn kind of speaks up in this like Hunger Games thing, right? Where, where she's like, I volunteer as tribute. And that was the first thing I thought. That's one of the reasons why I love Harley Quinn's character, because it's like, she says what I'm thinking in the story. And it's always kind of funny. But again, Superman steps up and says, no, Wonder Woman, you will not volunteer as a champion. I will be a champion for the Justice League. And it makes sense, right? I mean, Superman sees himself as the face of the Justice League. And in a lot of ways he is. Superman is the face of the Justice League team. So it would make sense, that we would say, okay, Superman's going to be the one kind of running the show. He's going to be the one that's going to stand up here and going to be the one who's going to fight on behalf of the Justice League. But in response to this, Batman says, okay, fine. Then on behalf of the gods of Olympus, we choose our champion, and our champion is Wonder Woman. And that creates such a cool situation, because what do you do when you have Superman fighting Wonder Woman? And this is one of the coolest things about this. This is one of the greatest things about this, because when we look at DC Comics, when we have Wonder Woman refusing to acknowledge this appointment, when she refuses to be the champion, which requires Zeus to step in and say, you will honor this trial by combat or this judgment by combat or you will all die. When we think of Superman and Wonder Woman, depending on what era you're coming from, you see them in two distinctly different ways. If you're coming from New 52 Superman, you see them as lovers. If you come from, pre-New 52 Superman, you see Wonder Woman as the woman that always wanted Superman but couldn't because Lois Lane had Superman's eye. You always see like these really cool elements, but when it comes to the concept of fighting, when it comes to the concept of warriors, it's kind of a mixed bag. There's been stories where Superman is depicted as easily being able to topple Wonder Woman, and there's stories where Wonder Woman is seen as easily being able to topple Superman. And so if we basically just split the difference here, we can argue that they are relatively equal in terms of their capabilities. But the cool thing about Injustice is Injustice says no, neither the New 52 nor the pre-New 52 is right in terms of this story. It's basically Injustice. It's Brian Buccellato saying when it comes down to it, when it comes down to fighting, Wonder Woman is much better than Superman. Well, she's as durable as Superman, she's as capable as Superman, but her fighting, her warrior prowess is so much higher. Now, the reason behind this, once she's able to topple Superman, the reason behind this line of logic is we basically kind of jump back to really when she first joined the Justice League. And it's a really cool moment here because it is a conversation between Batman and Superman where Superman and Wonder Woman are basically fencing. They're training, they're learning how to fight. And the cool thing about this is where Superman's taking it in a very kind of jovial nature, where he's just like, hey, she's a friend, I trust her, it's not a great big huge deal. Batman says, look, she's new here and you don't really trust her. Here's a question you have to ask. What if that sword was made of kryptonite? Then what would you have done? What if you were fighting someone and that sword was made of kryptonite? He says, you cannot be that trusting. And he says, that's your problem. Wonder Woman is a warrior first, and she's a friend second. If it comes down to it, she will kill you. And the reason why is because she will not pull her punches. She will become immersed in conflict. She'll become immersed in war. She'll basically lose herself in the battle. And when that happens, you will not stand a hope because you will see her as a friend. She will see you as an enemy, and she'll attack you as an enemy. And so it creates a really, really cool thing because we've seen that before, right? I mean, that's the whole basis behind Wonder Woman. She's a warrior first, she's a friend second. That was the whole basis behind Tower of Babel. When Batman basically created a way to incapacitate Wonder Woman, it wasn't to beat her to death, it was to plant a device in her ear that would create a holographic illusion that would lead her to believe she's fighting an enemy that's not really there. And so she would just keep fighting and fighting and fighting until she basically exhausts herself to the point of death. That's what Batman says. You cannot defeat Wonder Woman by sheer force. I mean, sure, somebody strong enough out there can, but when it comes to the earthly superheroes, all they can do is basically make her exhaust herself. They can make her fight to the point that she almost dies. That's really the only way to do it. Now, the other half of this is that in the middle of this whole thing, we get this really cool exposition from Hal Jordan, right? And Hal Jordan basically says, look, when I was a Green Lantern, I always, it was always based on willpower. How much willpower can I have? I have to have as much willpower as I need to defeat any particular enemy. I have to conquer my fear. I have to believe that I can defeat whoever it is that I'm facing off against. If I do not have that faith in myself, I will not win. But he says, as a Yellow Lantern, as a member of the Sinestro Corps, I sense fear everywhere I go. I sense fear no matter where I go. I can sense fear in organisms. I can sense fear in people. I can sense fear in anything. But he says, you know where I do not sense fear? I do not sense fear in Superman. Superman is fearless. Superman is not afraid of anything. He's not afraid of anybody here. He's not afraid of the gods of Olympus. He's not afraid of Wonder Woman. He's not afraid of anything. Now, what Hal Jordan says is, under normal circumstances, a man with nothing to lose is a dangerous man. But he says a man with nothing to lose could lose virtually everything, including his life. He could lose everything around him because of the fact that he does not recognize the danger of the situation. He allows his recklessness, he allows his anger, he allows his wrath to get the better of him, and he fails to see the fact that he's fighting a losing battle. Now, in the middle of this whole conflict, Sinestro makes his return. Now, Brian Buccellato doesn't really deal a whole lot with what Sinestro's been doing. All we know is that Sinestro's just been gone for months, because remember, it's been 3 years since all of Injustice started. And so, Sinestro's just been gone for like 3 or 4 months, and all Sinestro really says is, hey, look, there are other places around here that require my attention, and that's really it. But the issue is that Sinestro intervening and knocking out Wonder Woman has nullified this judgment by combat. And that was the rule. If someone intervened, if somebody stepped in, then it would bring the entire situation to a halt, and it would basically nullify this. And that's exactly what happened. Zeus says, Hermes, you know what you have to do. Zeus and Hera take off. Hermes says, attack. And so it is Superman and all of his forces against, these gods of Olympus. Now, the funny thing about this is we would say, yeah, man, like this is cool. This is an easy conflict, right? Like Superman and his forces could easily take these guys out. On the surface, yes. But then we're met with the arrival of Atlas, the man holding the world, the weight of the world on his shoulders. Hercules, Apollo, Eros, these warrior gods and goddesses, these Greek warrior gods and goddesses all start making their presence known. It's an army of Wonder Women basically, of all the capabilities and all the strengths that she has. And that's the problem here, is Superman sends out an SOS, right? I mean, he alerts everybody in the Justice League, everybody from Raven to Shazam. He even alerts Ares, the god of war, who apparently appears to be on the side of Superman. He alerts them all. He tells every last one of them, look, we need your help. We need you here to fight on our behalf. Now, this is kind of the funny thing, because what happens is we have Hermes basically saying, hey, look, we're gonna give you 24 hours to accept defeat. If you do not accept defeat, we're going to take all of you out. We're going to kill every last one of you. And that's the crazy thing, is because it could be done. It would be hard, but it could be done. With the exception of Superman and Wonder Woman, there's not one person on his team that stands a chance. Not one person on his team that could withstand the forces of all the members of the Greek gods. And we see this playing out specifically with Hercules and Hal Jordan. Let me tell you something, man. This is amazing how this goes down. Because the cool thing about this is that Hal Jordan is kind of cocky, but Hal Jordan has it where it counts, right? I mean, he was the greatest of the Green Lanterns. The Green Lanterns are all dead now, but he was the greatest of the Green Lanterns. The problem with this is that he's fighting Hercules. He's fighting a god of Olympus. When Hal Jordan starts popping out his constructs, when he starts trying to fight off against Hercules, it doesn't matter. Nothing he does is able to succeed against Hercules, because remember, Hal Jordan feeds on fear. His power is bolstered by fear. Well, what do you do when you go against a fearless man? All you have are your constructs. You got to create what you can and hope for the best, and it doesn't work. He literally takes Hal Jordan apart piece by piece, crushes his constructs, and that's the coolest thing about this. Now, of course, Superman steps in and is able to stop Hercules alongside Wonder Woman. But Hercules basically says, look, you have far greater things to worry about than this conflict. You can choose the side of the Justice League if you want to, but he says, no. You have much greater things to worry about. Now, what those things are, we don't particularly know. Presumably, it's the idea that Hercules is going to kill Wonder Woman. But in the midst of all this, we transition back to Shazam. And of course, he's joined with Ares. And Ares says, Superman needs you. He basically frees Shazam and says, Superman needs you. You need to go to his aid. Now, this is so cool. And the reason why this works is because Shazam is basically another Superman. It's like having two queens on the chessboard. All hope is lost for the other team. There's really no coming out of this. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. I'm really digging year 4. It doesn't quite have the same like pop and pizzazz as years 1 through 3, but I'm definitely digging it. Like it really is fun to go through. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explain, make sure you hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.